I'm Gene Delasala with Audioholics, and today we have a very special guest, Mr. David Frangioni. Hope I didn't butcher your name, David.
You didn't. David Frangioni. You said it perfectly. Thank you, and it's great to be here, Gene.
I'm a fellow Italian, so, with my last name, I should be able to pronounce yours as well.
Yeah, great. Well, you did.
So, David, you wear a lot of hats. I didn't admittedly know too much about you until recently, and then when I saw your biography, I was really impressed. You've done a lot of stuff, whether it's drumming, home theater, or setting up studios, or doing recordings and mixes and all that stuff. I think this is going to be a really interesting interview. I want to start with basically you telling me a little bit about your background so our viewers can get a little understanding of what you do.
Well, thank you. I started playing the drums at 2. At 2 years old, it turned out that my parents were not able to have children. Like the first 15 years they were married, which none of the doctors had no explanation for. Then they had my brother, who's 3 years older. Then they had me. So we had this like celebratory, really loving, close family. And at 2 years old, I got diagnosed with retinoblastoma, which is cancer of the eye. They subsequently had to remove my right eye. So I've only seen out of my left eye since 2. And through all the trauma and in and out of the cancer and the hospitals and my childhood being, kind of challenging, I found music as a refuge. And it turns out, of all things, my heart was into the drums. And by the time I was 8, I started taking private lessons. By the time I was 12, I was gigging with musicians older than myself and really starting to get some chops and starting to get an understanding of the music business and gigging live and dealing with other musicians and putting bands together and all these different things. I was very blessed at a young age to experience and learn. And then I caught the technology bug on my path to being the world's greatest drummer. And in doing that, I started my own MIDI consulting business, which was the really MIDI, musical instrument digital interface, was really the language that defined technology for music in the 80s. And I just really embraced it, learned as much as I could about it, started what turned out to be a very successful consulting business from nothing. 1-800-345-MIDI. All I could afford to do was get business cards made and hustle and learn as much as I could. So I built up a really good clientele in Boston, where I'm from. And in the middle of doing a lot of MIDI sessions and consulting and teaching to private individuals, I got the call from Aerosmith to help Tom Hamilton, their bass player, in 1989. And he ended up introducing me from working with him privately to the band. And I hit it off really well with Steven and Joe and the guys, and started to be their in-house engineer and technologist, built their studios, worked on their records during the pre-production and all of their different projects, from Pump to just Push Play. And even to this day, get called for projects with them. And then along the way, just built up, clientele of people who would call me and ask me to build them studios, build them theaters or automation systems, work on technology solutions for them. And then that's evolved to many other companies, projects, alliances, and here we are today.
You sound like you don't have a whole lot of free time on your hands. You're always out there just hustling.
100% free time is, no habla español free time.
Yeah. So, a little bit about your drumming history before we get into all the technology stuff. I guess, how did you learn how to play drums? Did you go to school? Was it self-taught? And what's your style, and what's your favorite kind of music to drum to?
Well, I originally I started playing on Yellow Pages. The Yellow Pages, we set up 3 of them, and it was snare, rack tom, floor tom on my kitchen table. And my parents saw that I was very interested, and I would play even on the Yellow Pages every day. So they said, let's send him for private lessons and see if he stays serious, because my parents were always supportive, very loving, and very much into taking an educational approach to something. Like, don't just wing it. Don't be self-taught. If you love it and you have it, in your heart as a passion, then you need to pursue it what they considered the right way, which was really focused on education. So I started drum lessons at Lexington Music Center, which was the town next to where I grew up in Arlington, Mass. And Mr. Woolley was my first drum teacher. And my parents saw that it was a drum set lesson, but I still only had the yellow pages. So I would learn everything on the yellow pages, go back, do my lesson on a real drum kit. And they saw that after a period of time, we got to figure out a way to get David a real drum kit. He's serious about this. I was very, very committed. And after a year, they got me a used Rogers Pink Champagne 4-piece drum kit, and I played the heck out of it. And then just, went from there and started. I was able to study with some amazing drummers: Alan Dawson, Joe Morello, Les DeMurle, Rod Morgenstein. I took some lessons from Louie Bellson, which was amazing, and was really on a path to pursue being the world's greatest drummer. My main influence from the earliest days was Carl Palmer of ELP. He was my drum hero. Of course, Buddy Rich as well. But I could relate to what Carl was doing, even though it was very much in Buddy's style. But yeah, Carl was so unique in how he approached it and what he did with ELP in Asia. And I could relate to it more because I'm a rocker. So, right, my heart wasn't in jazz the way that it's in rock. So being an ELP, Led Zeppelin, Van Halen, Beatles, all the great bands of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, what Carl was doing was really inspired me. And he was my drum hero, still is my number one drum hero. And not only inspired me in my drumming, and I tried to emulate what he was doing, but even in the way that he set up his kit, especially with Asia, and his kit, which was the stainless steel kit that he designed and British Steel built for him with ELP for the 73 Brain Salad Surgery tour all the way to their last record and tour, that kit inspired me. An actual drum kit was something that I was so into and so inspired by, and it was like my dream kit. So my life has had all these different elements to it that started really early and the roots of when I was 8, 9 years old, and still to this day are relevant.
Yeah, I got you. Well, now that kit, if I'm correct, I read that Ringo purchased that kit. Is that true?
That's absolutely right. The kit was built, Carl had it built custom in 72, 73, and then it saw all of its fame with the LP. I first saw it and heard it on the back of the Welcome Back My Friends double live LP. I looked on the back of it. I saw this kit. I was mesmerized. I searched far and wide to see more and more photos of it if I could. And in the 70s, the only way, there were 4 channels of television, and they never had ELP on them. Yeah. And there were some magazines. There was Circus, Cream, and Hit Parader. And that was it. People have to remember, there's no videos, no home video, no cable TV where I lived anyway, and no internet, of course. So it was really like see it on an album or get lucky in a magazine. Fortunately, when they did the Works album, there was another picture of it, so I could see like the far right, the 5 toms on the right and the etching and the temple blocks he had on the left and the little finger symbols he had put on there at that time. So I was like learning more and more about the kit. I was totally obsessed with it. And then I was following the lineage of the kit, and there was an article in the early 80s which was like the next update I had after ELP broke up. By then, Carl was in Asia. I was following his new Premier stainless steel kit, but I saw an article that Ringo Starr had bought the kit. And it turns out that Carl had put the kit in Sotheby's. Ringo got the catalog, called Carl, said, "Can you pull it out of the auction? I want it for my son, ZACK." And for like the first and only time that it's ever happened in auction history, Sotheby's, because it's a Beatle, Carl called and Sotheby's obliged, and he sold the kit to Ringo. The interesting thing as it pertains to my story is that I knew that happened by reading about it, of course, and then I ended up working with Ringo. And when I worked with him for several years, and the first project I did with him was build a studio for him in London, and I was able to ask him if he would sell me the kit. And he was like, whoa, I thought you were going to ask me, like, what snare drum did I use on Day Tripper? Or, what was that overdub on Sgt. Pepper? But that kit, he was like taken back. And of course the answer was no. Yeah. And so that was the end of that. And then it turns out Ringo had a big auction with Julian's in 2015, and he sold a lot of the drum kits that he had, most of which were in storage, including one of his Oyster Pearl Black Ludwig kits from Ed Sullivan, which ended up selling for over $2 million. And in that lot of drums that he offered at the auction was the Carl Palmer stainless steel kit that he owned. So now I'm thinking, oh my God, I could never afford this kit in my life. I grew up very poor. And now the kit's now not only the Carl Palmer famous kit, but now it's been owned by Ringo Starr. So I can
the
only
value's going to go way up.
That's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And but I believe it or not, I was able to purchase it at that auction, and now I have the kit. It's on the front cover of my book.
That's awesome. It's interesting that Ringo would buy a kit like that because he's a totally different style drummer than Carl. Carl's more of a technical drummer that, had the biggest drum solos in rock history. I mean, nobody came close to the kind of drum solos and the speed that he had. I really think, when you look at YouTube and they show you the world's fastest drummers, they never mention Carl, but he could roast most of those so-called world's fastest drummers. Yeah. Whereas Ringo is more of a subtle drummer. Ringo is more, he puts whatever beat needs to be in the track. He's kind of like the Miles Davis of drummers. The music is a space between the notes. So
it's true.
And I'm kind of curious why Ringo would want a drum set like that, because it's so many pieces, it's so intricate and so complex. I don't think he would even use most of the capability of it with his style of drumming.
He wouldn't. And, I because I have had direct contact with Ringo and Zach, I can answer why. There's two reasons why. The first, and this is right from Ringo, the first is that he wanted it for his son Zach, who does play large drum kits and even had Keith Moon's 25-piece white Premier kit at one point, which he went on and sold, but he had it. It was a gift from Keith. So he's really into big kits. And the second thing Ringo said was, I really wanted to preserve the kit. Ringo actually was a big fan of the kit, like a lot of us, and he just thought that from a drum historian perspective, it needed to be kept. So, I mean, really, it's quite amazing that it went down that way, but I pinch myself. There's two things in Carl Palmer's world that have intersected with me that will be with me for my life and beyond, in the legacy of having that kit and having done the DVD that we did together, coming from where I started and how Carl impacted my life as a drummer, as you say, his playing and his soloing, and that drum kit as the years that I was into ELP, that was his kit, because I came into ELP just as he had that kit, just due to my age and being around 7 or whatever at that time, and being just old enough to start listening to records and being into it. He's really been a huge inspiration.
Yeah, well, I could see that. And, he wrote the foreword of your book, Crash. And in fact, I'm going to show you everybody here. This is the book that we're going to be talking about today.
There's the kit.
There's the kit right there. So I do have a couple more ELP questions for you. We have a close friend of the family that's just obsessed with ELP. I mean, he lives and dies by ELP and Yes. And we all grew up on that as well. I have 4 older brothers, and I was introduced to this music, even though I'm only in my 40s right now. You wouldn't think I would know all this music, but I grew up with it. I would hear Carnival 9, and I would hear Tarkus and stuff like that. So the one question that my friend Ted Canty wanted to ask is, how do you feel the importance of Carl Palmer's emergence as one of the great prog drummers influence future drum students?
Oh, I think it's it's undeniable that he has had a huge impact on drumming from the time he started with ELP through now, and will be even beyond. And one example is he has a drum music camp, and he's doing in September of 2019, in the fall of 19. I think it's September. It's like September, October, November, somewhere in there, that he's doing a drum camp and in Philadelphia. And I had the honor of taking a drum lesson with Carl. After we did that DVD, the day after, he was gracious enough to give me a drum lesson, which I asked him for, and he said, yeah, I'll do it. And that was 2.5 years ago, and I'm still practicing and perfecting that lesson. One lesson.
Wow.
So the opportunity to get with Carl for a couple of days and learn, and people have to do it. They have to go to this drum camp because he is such an inspiration. When you hear him play, and then when you can get from him how he approaches things and what technique he uses, you can really understand what the path is to achieve that. And I think that drumming has been very, very positively affected by his playing, and not just in the LP, what he did with Asia, what he's doing with his trio right now. He's still drumming at the highest level. It's unbelievable. When people say the Buddy Rich of rock, which, you know, you don't get a better compliment than that, because Buddy's the greatest overall drummer of all time.
Yeah.
But Carl really is. He is the greatest rock drummer. He invented it. He's a guy that inspired Neil Peart, who has gone on to be one of the greatest drummers of all time. So, but it started with Carl in rock at that level, and there'll never be another Carl Palmer.
No, and the fact that the guy is, I would think he's about 67, 68 years old by now, right? Yeah. And he's still drumming at the level that you're saying, at the speed and the tenacity.
Touring.
Yeah. And I heard that after he does a concert that he has to literally put his arms in ice because I guess you get carpal tunnel from doing all that drumming, and it's such a workout basically. So he stays in great shape, obviously.
He does. He's amazing. And I got an inside look at it that few people will ever see unless they're in his band or in his inner circle. When we did that DVD, because we did the rehearsals together and then we did the show, and I saw the routine, and it's so awesome to see. I mean, I've had as you mentioned earlier, my clientele has been pretty amazing, and it's just through hard work and just putting myself in the right place at the right time as much as I can, and being blessed, really. And I've been able to work with so many amazing people, and I see in doing that all their different routines. You right. I'm on the inside, right? So I'm seeing, and everybody has a routine, and many of them are very different. So you're able to see them and then adapt, and take from each one, what works for you. And when I saw Carl's routine, it was just really, for being a big fan, it was really cool to see how he gets in the zone. He has a very specific regimen every show, and he's been doing it that way for his whole career. 3 hours before showtime, it's like this. Then 2 hours, it's that. And 1 hour, and then after the show, the warm down. And it really was awesome to see that and understand, that's how you perform at that level for 50 plus years.
Yeah, it is amazing, because most drummers kind of burn out after time, but he's still going at a crazy level. The other question, I have one more ELP question for you I wanted to ask. I guess Carl's equivalent to drums on keyboards, it's good that he found someone like Keith Emerson, because he was a wild player. I mean, he was, the king of keyboards, especially. He sort of invented the Moog synthesizer, and he's kind of pioneered that whole industry. The question I would have for you is, how would you describe the talent that's needed to drum to someone like Keith? Because he's all over the place. I mean, especially in his live concerts, he would do a lot of improv.
Yes, and that's why Carl and Keith were just hand in glove. The magic of ELP was that you didn't just have, and I say that with the most respect you could ever say, the three greatest musicians in each of their, instruments, because Greg Lake, so it's all three guys were just the quintessential, virtuosos of their instruments, and the timing was perfect, but even greater was the chemistry, the way those guys played off of each other, because Carl he's such a propelling drummer, and he'll speed up, he'll slow down, he'll play as the emotion and the energy that he's putting forth he feels musically, and those guys went with it. It was like it was the rock equivalent of when you hear Tony Williams and Ron Carter and Miles Davis just go, and it's not about anybody being perfect in any one area. It's about the sum of it is perfect, because it's so virtuosically musical. And that's what ELP did as a rock band. And again, we'll never see it again.
Yeah, and you know, and there's been some negative criticism about their style of music in the past, and some of it is because he didn't always stay in the same time signature. You know, progressive rock had a lot of odd time signatures. Like you look at the old Genesis stuff, like Selling England by the Pound, you know, or Supper's Ready. It's in like 9/8 timing. It's amazing stuff, but it was not conventional. So they would get, you know, they would get bashed by critics that didn't understand that genre of music. And then a lot of people, one of the problems with ELP music is I think they personally relied too much on keyboards and not enough piano. And some of those sounds became so obsolete. Like if you put on Carnival 9 today, or you put on Brain Salad Surgery album, it didn't weather as well as a Beatles album.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of wish ELP stuck to more of the piano kind of jazzy stuff, like what Emerson, Lake and Powell did on that one album that they did. Most of that album, I still could put it on and really enjoy. You know, like Lay Down Your Guns or Step Aside, which has very jazzy overtones. And ELP did a lot of that. They did a lot of that in Works Volume 2. Even Love Beach. People laugh at Love Beach, but I think Memoirs of an Officer and a Gentleman is one of their best compositions of all time. And that had mostly piano in it. Beautiful piano, guitar, great vocals from Greg Lake, and excellent drumming from Coleman.
Well, it's, you know, it's the thing about it is that music, it's so individual, and the same thing that makes ELP very identifiable. You could say, okay, well, it was a 70s sound, or it was a this sound or that sound. But personally, I listen to Carnival Number 9. I listen to the different records, and I love the way it sounds. And it's just my personal opinion. I think that the critics that, you know, talk about odd time signatures being, you know, self-indulgent or whatever words that they use.
Pretentious.
Yeah, pretentious, right? All of that stuff, because it's so complex to play. They're missing the point that the music is for people to enjoy. And it's played flawlessly. It's played virtuosically. It's played musically. It's the vision of the artist. And if you don't enjoy it, then don't listen to it. But if you listen to it and you enjoy it, that's what it's for. And when you look at ELP and Genesis, we're playing stadiums, you know, and for many years, their whole existence pretty much, they were playing to 50 to 100,000 people a night. And that's a lot of people enjoying music. And that's really what it's all about. And Carl did the same thing with Asia. As you probably know, I had the privilege of working with Phil Collins for a few years ago. And I was able to spend time with him and you know, ask questions about Genesis and his solo time and just learn about that whole period, because Phil was an inspiration of mine as a drummer and, of course, as an artist. And that was a great privilege working with him. And you know, just understanding, like, you know, what their evolution looked like. So I kind of was able to get a firsthand view of both the Genesis Phil world and the Carl Palmer ELP world. And there were a lot of similarities. But the fact is that it's timeless music as far as what it did in its day and what you can still get from it today. And the solos and so much of what it was about during the period where they were doing that really progressive stuff, you know, still hasn't been bettered that I've heard.
Right. Well, that's one thing I wanted to ask you about. Is Phil Collins is kind of one of my heroes, believe it or not.
I believe
I know
it.
people think he's just bubblegum music because of his solo work. In fact, I think his first solo album is just amazing. The drumming in that album, the way that he puts stuff together, he doesn't showboat, but his timing, I think, is one of the best in the industry. And he's so diversified because he's played jazz with Brand X. He's done swing. He did tributes to the Buddy Rich band. He's all over the place. He's such a talent. He's such an icon, and it's so sad to see that he's not aging well. I was a little surprised. I was a little surprised when I opened your book and I went into the intro to look at what all the drummers are featured and all the drum kits, and I didn't see Phil Collins or Bill Bruford or even Kenny Arnoff.
Well, I have drums. Believe it or not, I don't have any drums from Phil, which is ironic because he's one of the guys I've worked with. But we never got around to talking about if he has any drums. And I always felt like if he did, his focus would be to make sure that his son Nick had them, because that's the drummer of his band. And
Yeah.
That's his main priority, as it should be. It's his son. But with Kenny and Bill, I have drums that Kenny owned and played on iconic Mellencamp records. I have Bill Bruford's signature drums that he did not play. They were just his signature drums that were for sale that sound great. But I only did kits for the most part in the drum set. So the fact that I only had snare drums from those guys is why they didn't make it in there. But people ask me all the time, what was the selection process of the drummers?
Yeah.
And I said, the selection process was drum kits that I liked, that I was able to obtain, and that I thought should be preserved for a lot longer than my life.
I got you. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I didn't quite understand that when I first picked up the book. And as I started reading, I started realizing this is more about the history of drum kits that have really made an impact in the music industry.
Yeah, according to David Frangioni. And I found that a lot of people agree with my choices. Of course, there's so many kits out there that I would love to have that either I haven't been able to find, afford, or don't exist anymore. Like the Pictures of Lily kit, the original from Keith, was broken up. I did a whole, detective work on it, and each piece, the kit was broken in pieces, and like one guy has a floor tom and one guy has a rack tom, and it's virtually impossible to ever put that kit together, even if most of it's even available, even if you were able to get 10 different people to give up their piece. And then there were other drum sets that have never been available before. There are drum sets that are long gone, and like AJ Perot's trash can kit with Twisted Sister that was in all the Ludwig ads in the 80s. I thought that was a really cool, iconic kit. We were able to get to his son, who inherited the kit. He said, the kit was broken up into all the pieces like Pictures of Lily, but there wasn't one piece that could be tracked down. Even ironically, the Pictures of Lily kit, I actually found a couple of guys that had a couple of the pieces that were not interested in donating or selling them in any way. But the AJ kit, there wasn't one piece that can be found anymore, according to my research. So there's so many different scenarios because the kits are original, they're iconic, they're, in a lot of cases, really special kits, I think in almost every case. And it's amazing that we have that many.
Yeah, it is. It's beautiful photos in here. And I was happy to see Stephen Weiss.
That's Mark Weiss.
Oh, Mark Weiss did the photos. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, legendary rock photographer. Got to give him a shout out because he shot all the studio shots in my museum of those drum kits.
I'll show you the book cover again.
Including those 3 shots on the cover. And those photos. Every shot that's not a live photo, and even a couple of are Mark Weiss doing the photography. And I thought he just did a brilliant job.
Oh, it's beautiful. And like I said, I was happy to see Steve Gadd there because he's one of the few jazz drummers that's in the book. And jazz.
Well, he plays everything, right? He's a great jazz drummer from his Chick Corea and Chuck Mangione and all those.
Steely Dan.
Yes, and Paul Simon, and he's got all these incredible rock chops, so.
Yep.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, you got some great drum kits in here. If anybody's really into drumming, I play as an amateur. I don't play at your level. I just play for fun. I have a Roland electric drum kit, and it's a pretty nice one. But yeah, I like that because I can't play regular drums. I'll go deaf. You got to wear earplugs,
drums are great drums.
Yeah, and you got to preserve your hearing in my business because I do critical listening for audio. But anybody that's really into drumming or just wants to know the history of their favorite drummers, there's a lot of famous guys in here. You got Van Halen, Alex Van Halen. I think that's great. And so much about Cole Palmer, stuff I didn't even know. Buddy Rich. I mean, Ringo is just, it's quite a collection you have here. I'm very impressed with this book.
Thank you. It was a labor of love. And it was made for guys like you and me. I really had a very clear vision of who I was creating this book for. And it's exactly you, me, and the millions of people like us that love drums. You don't have to be a drummer. You don't have to be professional. It's not. I also knew who it was not being made for, and I was very focused on that as well, which are drum geeks. Drum geeks will love the book, but it's not for drum geeks. It's not about this is a 1975 Slingerland snare, serial number such and such, and they only made 7 of 10 with chrome plating and the other 3 were brass. And it's not that. It's all about, look at this book. You don't have to read a word if you don't want to. Reference it whenever you want that inspiration. Look at the kits you've never been that up close and personal with because you couldn't get to them. And just be inspired. Just enjoy it. It's coffee table. It's look at the pictures. It's not, you don't have to read a word of text. And
yeah, exactly.
you'll love the book.
Yeah.
That's who it was made for. It was about celebrating drums in a very visual way.
So let me ask you this now. This book has pretty much a history of drummers from, some of them are still current today, but most of them are from the past. As a drummer yourself, who do you feel today are the top drummers in rock and jazz, rock, progressive rock, that kind of stuff? Because I have a few favorites of my own. I'm wondering if you're familiar with them or not, but I'm just kind of curious to see who you think are the emerging drummers today.
Well, emerging and best drummers are not really the same in my book, because I think the best drummers today are Vinnie Colaiuta, Dave Weckl, of course Neil Peart's retired, Carl's still playing, so he's still up there, and you have guys who are newer than that, and the drummer that did the duet with Dave Weckl on the Stevie Wonder song on Dave Weckl album he did a couple of years ago. Coleman is his last name, and just an amazing drummer. There's guys out there. There's always great drummers coming on the scene.
Yeah.
But I look at drumming. I'm not looking at, my personal view is it's not athletic to me. Even though it's a very athletic instrument, it's not athletic in my view of who's the fastest, who's the newest, who's this, who's that. It's really about who's playing the best drums and inspiring me. That's my personal taste.
Yeah.
So if a guy's new or if a guy's old, it doesn't change. If he sounds hip and he's playing amazing, it's like no different than when Dave Weckl was brand new. He was one of the biggest inspirations for me when he first came on the scene. Now he's taken his drumming from absolutely mind-blowing in 1985 to, Buddy Rich levels in 2019. Like, he's continued to grow and get better, just like Buddy did. Buddy and Louie, when you look at their drumming in the 40s and the 50s, and they were just phenomenal powerhouses, they actually got better as they got older.
Right.
The end of Buddy Rich and Louie Bellson's career was their best drumming. I mean, it's just
funny.
like,
I saw a YouTube video of Buddy Rich doing this amazing solo, and halfway into it, he was actually having a heart attack. People were reporting that he was having a heart attack, but he kept going. and that to me, in call me old fashioned, whatever, that to me is what gets me inspired and what I learn the most from, and what I endeavor to become. And just get better as you get older. And that's what Dave and Vinny are doing, and that's what Buddy and Louie did. And but who do you were going to mention some guys that you thought were phenomenal new drummers. Who are you hearing? Oh, honestly, if you were writing a sequel to this book,
Which I will.
You will, okay.
Yep, there'll be a volume 2.
I want credit for these 2 if you put them in.
All right, tell me.
But I think Gavin Harrison is just an amazing drummer. He's so tasteful in everything he does, his arrangements, his songwriting. His kits are amazing. If you look at what he did with Porcupine Tree, and now he's with King Crimson, and he's done jazz stuff on the side. I think, no, the Aristocrats was Marco Minnemann. That's another one I'm going to mention. Marco Minnemann now works with Steven Wilson, and he's done the Aristocrats, and he's done various different bands. Those 2 drummers, to me, are the most inspirational drummers that I've found in music today. They're just unbelievable. I also like the guy from Styx, I forgot. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a close friend of mine, and he's in the book, and his kit's amazing. He is an absolute drum god.
Another guy I'd like to mention. Right? Another guy I'd like to mention.
Years now.
I'm sorry?
He's been with Styx about 20 to 25 years.
Yeah, exactly. Another guy I would mention too is the drummer from Spock's Beard. His name is Nick DeVangelioni or something like
The
that. That's
Virgilio?
kind. What's that?
Nick DeVirgilio?
Yes, that
Yep.
guy is a tremendous drummer. If you listen to the album Snow, and it's like going back in time to when prog rock was at its peak.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, he is great. And those are, the with Crash, it's as much about the drum kits as the drummers. And as you can see in so many cases, the greatest drummers in history also had some of the greatest drum kits in history. There's not much. I don't think there's many drummers in there that wouldn't be considered some of the greatest in history. I think they all kind of fall into a pretty iconic category, but the other drummers you mentioned do as well. And if I'm able to get drum kits that I also feel are iconic, which in most cases requires a pretty unusual drum kit. The only real exceptions to that was like Buddy Rich's kit, because he made the kit iconic instead of it being both, the kit and the
Yeah, I
drummer.
got
Whereas you look at like Neil Peart's R30 kit, the drum kit's iconic, the drummer's iconic, hence it belongs in Crash. So I'd love to. I think I got offered a Gavin Harrison kit a while back, but for whatever reason, maybe the kit I got offered wasn't one of his most special kits, because I passed on it for at the time.
Well,
But,
if you get a
you know,
chance, look at the Blu-ray Anesthetized concert from Porcupine Tree. It's not only is it a fabulously mixed in 5.1 surround sound disc, but it's got great music on it, and that's his biggest kit that I've seen. It's a very
oh,
impressive
awesome!
kit.
I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah, definitely. So this was great. I enjoyed talking about drums with you. I think what we're going to do is we're going to have you back and discuss all your home theater expertise. I think this wraps this video up. Um, I'd like to tell everybody out there to take a look at this book, Crash. I believe you could even purchase it on Amazon. Am I correct?
Of course, it's published by Insight Editions. It's available at Barnes and Noble, Amazon, worldwide.
Yeah, it's well worth the 30. I think it's like $40 or something like that. I mean, it's a
Yeah, the
hard copy.
retail's 40, but I think they sell it for around 30 on Amazon, and it's done really well. We're really,
Yeah.
really excited that people are enjoying it, and it's really doing well.
Great. Well, guys, we're going to have David Frangioni back to do home theater talk, because I think that's going to be another interesting episode to have with him. And I do recommend you guys, if you want to get special privileges to the Audioholics website, to get unique content that you don't find on the website, you don't find on our YouTube channel, we do have Patreon. So it's patreon.com/audioholics.com. Check it out, guys. And, I'd like to hear your comments below. Who are your favorite, most iconic drummers? Who are the guys that inspired you? Are there any drummers watching this right now? Because I'd like to hear comments from you as well. And my friends, I appreciate the time you spent here listening to us about talking drums. I love this stuff. This is one of my hobbies. And my friends, until next time, keep listening. Okay, we are recording.
All right.
Hit stop.